Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again here at Illuminated. I'm Jim Garfield with the IVI IPO. We're joined with our last candidate for tonight, Brad Trowbridge, who's running for judge in the 8th Sub-Circuit.
Correct.
And that's, you're filling the Gordon vacancy.
Right.
We say vacancy, does that mean that someone retired or is?
Typically it means someone has retired. In this case, Judge, now Justice Gordon, is on the appellate court. So as a result, he had to give up his seat at the county level. Okay,
and that just caused an opening at the circuit level. Okay. Now, where is the 8th Sub-Circuit?
Hard to define, but basically it's from Devon to as far south as 32nd Street, and from the lake to roughly Ashland. Though there's a part in Andersonville where it goes to Western, and the western boundary kind of runs at an angle so that it comes to a point at 32nd Street. So as you get closer to downtown, it becomes more narrow.
Interesting, okay. And those are set by the state legislature?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I want to talk a little about your background. First of all, you've been endorsed by IVI IPO, so congratulations. Thank you for that. As well as Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and Congressman Mike Quigley, Representatives Ann Williams, Kelly Cassidy, Margaret Croak, Alderpersons Osterman, Tunney, and Smith, Chicago Now, which is the National Organization for Women.
Correct.
And IVI, as well as several ward organizations and committee persons.
Correct.
So that's a very, very diverse group there, so
yes.
Congratulations on that.
Proud of that group.
What's your background for running for judge?
Well, first of all, before I became an attorney, I got a master's degree in something called human development counseling, which is much like social work. Mm-hmm. And so for about 10 years, I worked in Chicago working with, I would say, disadvantaged or underserved populations, including teen mothers, people in the LGBTQ community, particularly at a time when AIDS was rampant. Mm-hmm. Worked with chronically mentally ill and victims of hate crime in particular.
And that was all before becoming a lawyer, or is
all
that
before going to law school?
Okay.
Yes.
And do you hope to bring some of what you learned there to the experience in the bench?
I think yes, including my work as an attorney. But one of the things I keep saying is that one of the things that my clients taught me when I was doing counseling with them was to listen more, talk less, and ask questions when I don't understand. And I think that's a skill set that a lot of judges lose track of or don't really have it. It's like I will learn a lot more from listening than I will learn from me talking. So that's something I hope to bring to the bench.
Okay. Now, in your legal practice, have you focused on one area? What's your general practices that you've done?
I've practiced, I think, in every division, including criminal, chancery, probate, county, which is adoption. But most of my work is in domestic relations and domestic violence. My passion has been working with survivors of domestic violence, helping them they and their children escape abusive situations. I was the president of something called the Chicago Metropolitan Battered Women's Network, which was the umbrella organization at the time for all the domestic violence service agencies in Chicago. And I helped co-found an agency called A New Direction on the South Side, which provides free counseling and legal advocacy services for survivors and their children.
That's fantastic. So now are you hoping, everyone of course always starts out in traffic and doing the lower level stuff. Is family law where you'd like to end up, or domestic relations and things like that?
I think it makes the most sense from an experience standpoint. Obviously, Chief Judge Evans decides where people go, but typically they go where their practice experience is. The learning curve is much steeper for someone, for example, who's been a state's attorney and gets assigned to domestic relations and the rules are different, the law is different, the atmosphere is different. A lot of people are in domestic relations court representing themselves. You don't have the right to be assigned an attorney. And so it's a very different setting from, for example, criminal court, where almost everyone has an attorney unless they elect not to have one.
And just knowing that kind of balance is going to change the whole outcome of the case, because whether or not they know they need an attorney or who to talk to or anything like that, how do you deal with folks who don't know what they don't know?
Well, I'm committed to making sure that people who want representation get every chance to get that. There's a list of resources available. Of course, there are often waiting lists. Mm-hmm. There are self-help stations in the Daily Center. I also would be very lenient to give people time to file the proper motion or response. The goal is to do substantial justice. It's not to get people in and out and have somebody who may be disadvantaged lose through no fault of their own or the merits of their case. So I'm very sensitive to people who don't have the resources to hire an attorney, and we want to give them every opportunity to present their case.
Now, is there anything, clearly you're very passionate about advocating, and you've been an advocate now for decades
right.
of litigation, as well as before that working with these survivors. As a judge, you of course have to go ahead and be impartial and just follow the law. How difficult do you think that shift will be?
I don't think it would be that difficult for me, because I have seen and I've had clients who made false allegations. So I think I have a pretty good, and maybe that's from the counseling years, I have a pretty good sense of when someone's making something up, their stories don't add up, that you ask them the same questions over a period of time and the answers are different. So I don't think I would go in with a bias. I under, for example, the Domestic Violence Act, to grant an order of protection, it only requires that the plaintiff or the petitioner prevail on preponderance of the evidence. And that's usually more likely than not to be true. Mm-hmm. I'll say she, because most of the times the survivors are women. All she has to do is present a more credible case than the respondent, then the relief she would be requesting, in this case an order of protection, would be granted. I think a lot of judges hold those people to a higher standard. It's only preponderance of the evidence. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's not
criminal world.
It's not. It's not. Is it more likely than not? And that I would stay focused on.
Now, when you are running for Congress, you're running for state representative, you're running for something like that, you argue policy. Here's what I want to do. Here's the things I want to implement. Here's the thing I'm going to. As a judge, you can't do any of those things.
No.
So how do you put yourself out there and say I'm the right choice? Based on what? Like just experience alone, or?
From my experience.
Okay.
When I tell people I've been a social worker and these are things I've been committed to, from, for example, working with teen moms to working with survivors of domestic violence, that sends a message about where my values are. From a pure get out the vote standpoint, I talk about the fact that I'm the only candidate in my race with all positive bar ratings. Both of my opponents have multiple negative ratings. So I focus on that there's an independent group of people that have determined that I am qualified or recommended, depending on the language that they use, and that they have not found my opponents qualified or recommended.
And I did note that you are recommended by the Lesbian and Gay Bar Association of Chicago, the Hellenic Bar, Black Women's Lawyers Association, the Cook County Bar Association, Decalogue Society of Lawyers, Women's Bar Association of Illinois, and the Chicago Council of Lawyers. So I
think that's all.
A pretty diverse list right there.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's probably the thing that I'm most proud of, that I was found qualified by so many diverse groups.
Mm-hmm. Which, how rare is that? How common is that in candidates for judge?
I don't know the answer to that. Some bar associations are much more rigid than others. But I've looked at all the different races, and it seems like the majority of them, there are multiple candidates who don't have all positive bar ratings.
So what is it that you hope to, since you can't bring policy, what is it you want to bring to the role as judge? Is it just temperament? Is it a judicial philosophy?
It's more like, let's get to the bottom of this and get these folks out of court. One of the things that the court system does, because it's adversarial, is, for example, in family court, domestic relations, we make people say the worst things about each other, and then a judgment is entered, and then we essentially say, now go co-parent together. It's not a system that works very well for co-parenting. So a judge told me many years ago, who's now retired, she said, Brad, sometimes the call is so close. The important thing is that you make the call and get people out of court so they can begin to heal. But having cases go on for 3 or 4 years, people spend tons of money, they say awful things about each other, no one wins, and then we say to them, okay, off you go. So my goal would be to expedite cases as quickly as possible. Come to a resolution, hold attorneys to my orders that say something is due on such and such date. Don't give a lot of continuances unless there's a good reason. Get it done. Don't let it linger. It doesn't help anybody.
It also doesn't help the court system to have more cases piling up further and further back.
No. I mean, and it's one of the things, unfortunately, the pandemic did, was that it backed us up so much more than we had already been backed up, because we lost several months with the courts essentially being shut down.
And did that affect domestic relations, family law? When you have abusive situations, those still had to wait longer and longer?
Abusive situations got heard, although the system wasn't at the time streamlined. I think we were all learning, using Zoom and, not being able to physically file documents. We were e-filing them. Sometimes we didn't get them back for 2 or 3 days. You have to make calls to the clerk's office to say, hey, I've got this client whose physical safety may be in danger. I need you to get these documents to the judge so I can get in front of someone. It's much better now than it was, but I think the pandemic sent all of us into a tailspin. We weren't ready for this.
No, and I do find it impressive that it took a global pandemic for the Cook County courts to start using email on a regular basis, but...
Well, and also Zoom. I think it's here to stay, because what we learned is so much can be done remotely. You don't have to physically appear in court to tell the judge what's going on and get another court date. You can do that on Zoom in 5 minutes.
And is it something you hope to use more of in your courtroom?
If I'm a judge, the only cases I would have appear before me were ones where I physically needed to see people for whatever reason. And one of the reasons for that is that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that a lot of people don't have time to take off from work. So every time a litigant has to come to court, that person loses work, loses money. And that's not efficient. And sometimes they're not needed to be there. And so I would only have people appear in person if it were essential. For example, if one of the things that happens is that the stereotype is father doesn't pay child support, he's way behind, he's been ordered to pay a certain amount, he doesn't do it. You have a hearing on what's called a petition for rule to show cause. That father may be taken into custody if he doesn't show up with money, that day.
He has to show up.
Show up, because the alternative is, if you don't provide at least a portion of that was ordered for back child support, then you're taken into custody. Kind of hard to do that on Zoom.
That's true. That's true. Well, I look forward to seeing all these things implemented. I look forward to having your passion brought to our judicial system.
Thank you.
What's your punch number this time?
192.
192. All right, folks. 192, go out there. June 28th is our primary. Early voting is June 13th to the 27th. Make sure to vote. Brad Trowbridge for 8th Sub-Circuit Judge.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. you.